So I work in a lab, so I'm a research scientist, staff scientist in the Tishkoff lab at UPenn. That's the lab as of a few months ago. And the focus of the lab is studying African populations using modern genetic tools. And studying the microbiome is one of the things that we do. So the lab does a lot of different things. This is just like one of them. So, so why are we studying African populations at all? Well, a couple of reasons. One, there's humans originated in Africa, which has all kinds of like ramifications. So it's a very genetically diverse continent of people. About 50,000, 60,000 years ago, a group of them migrated out and spread across the rest of the world. But the origins were in Africa. So the next slide. So in biomedical research, most of the research is still done in like European ancestry individuals. So, and this also has ramifications in terms of equity for like things that we're learning about the genetics of people and how that influences the medicines we produce. So as of a few years ago, this is one type of modern genetics study. Only about 10% of the people included in the studies were of recent African ancestry. So we're one of the labs that is trying to kind of, get past that, sort of include more people in modern research. Next slide. So the rationale for this project, so as we've all learned, the gut microbiome is a bunch of bacteria that live in our gut, and it does all kinds of essential things for our body and for our health. And we first, as a field of studying the gut microbiome, like it's not that old, like probably in the mid-aughts is when a lot of the major studies started looking at this and using DNA to study like what actually is in our microbiome. Next slide. And one of the early findings was that it was very clear that the gut microbiome differed depending on the kind of society that people were sampled from, and that in like urban Western countries, that the microbiome was much less diverse. There's much fewer different kinds of bacteria that inhabit the gut, compared to when you look at people that were living in more traditional societies where they're growing their own food or living off the land, much more diverse kinds of bacteria that live in their intestines. And so there's a lot of effort to try and understand why this might be the case. Next slide. So as a lab that studies different kinds of like mostly rural African groups, we were well positioned to go to different kinds of places where we had groups that were foragers, they're literally hunting and gathering and living off of the landscape, versus people that are farmers, settled, raising their own crops, and then pastoralists. So these are groups that are they have sort of a cattle-based economy. And so kind of one question that we could address was whether or not we see differences amongst these different kinds of traditional dietary types. Next slide. So for the study that was kind of the basis of tonight, it was a study that some members of the lab went to Tanzania and Botswana. They were there for about 4 months. This is like an off-grid science, so they have basically a mobile clinic that Dr. Tishkoff has sort of figured out protocols and how to actually do this. It's very challenging work. This is why not many groups in the world really do this kind of work. And so they went out for 4 months. They went to the places. They recruit participants, and they take stool samples and other kinds of blood draws, and then that gets shipped back to Penn, where we do some of the analysis using the modern tools. Next slide. So this is definitely kind of science that is like very interdisciplinary. I'm not trained as a microbiologist, but we at Penn we collaborated with Rick Bushman, who is like a head of the microbiology lab. This work was done led mainly by Megan Rubel and myself. So she was a former graduate student in the Tishkoff lab. And then we have partners at universities and the different places that we go to who help us like do this kind of research. Anyway, so it's a very interdisciplinary kind of work. And it's sort of a long process. This project, from start to finish, took like a good 7 years probably.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I played a bit at the end, but like I didn't go to the field. Like I'm more of a computer science person by nature, so I didn't touch the samples. That would be bad. But so anyway, so it takes all kinds of people just to like do this kind of work. Next slide. So we don't know. So there was a group of farmers. So these are all rural groups, but none of them are living in towns. So we were not expecting this. Just based on previous studies, we figured that we wouldn't see any gut microbiome. The gut microbiome sort of falls into different types, roughly speaking, and there's sort of a type that's associated with like processed foods and high fat, high protein diets that we have more in like the West, versus diets that are like high in fiber and much more like plant-based. That tends to have a different type of community of bacteria that like that. But what we found in certain people in Botswana, these were farmers, they had profiles, I won't go into the details, but like that looked like kind of, you just looked at it, you couldn't tell if it was from Botswana or Philadelphia. Like, you could tell like, there's like thousands of different kinds of bacteria, but there's maybe only like a handful that are really common and predominant. So you could tell if you looked at the really rare guys, like those tend to be very different in different places. But for some reason, these guys had bacteria that kind of looked like people that we had sampled here in Philadelphia, and it wasn't due to sex, it wasn't correlated with their weight, or we couldn't find a good answer. So this was still kind of unresolved sort of mystery that we weren't quite sure. Next slide. So our work is kind of building on the general trends that other people have seen, which is that this shift towards like different kinds of diets really does impact the kinds of bacteria that like to live in your gut and that like to eat that kind of food. And so at some point in human history, as our ancestors at one point were all hunting and gathering, and then at some point they were all like rural farmers or like small, holding cattle, pastoralists. So our gut microbiome has been sort of evolving and changing as the societies change sort of their dietary practices. And so, so it's definitely something that seems to have occurred, and we're still sort of, as a field, trying to understand what that means, if it means, what are the ramifications of that. Like, that's still something that, is under active research. So, that's it.
Presentation, and definitely did a better job than all of us could in dealing with these questions. Sure. Let's open up the floor for some questions that we can ask Dr. Hansen. So do we have any questions? Yes.
In your slide, you had lipids versus carbohydrates versus alcohol. What's a lipid?
Lipids are fat.
So is fat, would fat be a reasonable replacement for lipid?
Yeah, so I mean, a kind of fat. So.
Another question? Yes.
Are probiotics total BS if you're eating the same diet as someone else?
I mean, I would say not total BS. No, I mean
mostly. Like what percentage are we talking about?
Maybe like 30% BS. Like this is all like it's an emerging, like we're learning all kinds of new stuff, and so people tend to want to like hype up like something that just sounds good. But